Hi, this is Gabor Sabo again from the Pearl Maven TV show, and with me is Michael Schwern, who is the author of Test Simple and the introducer of a lot of testing in the Perl world. Hi, Michael. How
Hi,
are you?
Gabor,
You
and
have a
hello, Internet.
really nice background. You have not
Yes, this is my palatial Portland estate, and the burning sky orb has come out today.
beautiful, beautiful. It's night here, so um, I wanted to ask you. Let's start from the beginning.
hmm
Where did you start Perl, or how did you get involved? And
so I got back in 1995. I got thrown out of a computer engineering program at one of the more prestigious universities, and thrown right into the beginning of the dot-com boom, and was very lucky. Found an environmental nonprofit that needed anybody who knew, what HTML was. And they had this thing called the Environmental Library that was written in Perl, and it was written in quite disastrous Perl, but I didn't know any better. So I basically started maintaining that and was learning from programming Perl, the pink camel, and not from learning Perl, which was a bit interesting. And kind of fell into it from there. And it's sort of like with the first language that I really learned, and found somebody introduced me to Pound Pearl and IRC, and kind of went on from there.
nice. So how did you get to the point that you became the king of testing in Perl? I think
Oh,
I started to be involved in the Perl community in Munich, Germany, I think, where you gave a talk, if I remember correctly, about testing.
was that the tutorial that I came in like 15 minutes late, totally unprepared?
I don't remember anything like that, but yeah.
I became the king of testing through a serious application of B. Um, how did I become? I think my education program was interesting. It's like I said, I got thrown out of computer engineering pretty early. I didn't really learn much. I learned that I didn't like C++, and I really liked Perl because it had no strictures. I was handed basically two books to learn from. I was handed Programming Perl, Pink Camel, and I was also handed a book called Code Complete, which was a book basically syntax style and issues like that. And as a new programmer, I was simultaneously learning syntax and style, which I think is very different. And so I learned very rapidly about things like, well, stuff breaks all the time, and it'd be great if there was a way to fix that. And so I wound up starting to write my own testing library, totally ignoring the existing test.pm because I didn't even know it existed, and the documentation was inscrutable. Um, and by working at a company called Blackstar with Tony Bowden and Karen and Marty and a bunch of other people, we started developing a testing system using a system called Aegis, which if anybody in the audience has used this system, you'll be both simultaneously grinning and groaning. It's a version control system that forces you to write tests, um, which is a very interesting philosophy. So that the beginnings of Test More came out of that, and after that job at Blackstar in 1999, um, Test More got published as a basically saying, "Wow, testing is really undocumented, and the interfaces are really hard, and everybody thinks this is really hard. So I'm going to write something really easy to make it so that you can just write a test in 2 lines," and that's where Test Simple came from. And then basically proceeded to browbeat P5P for a year or two, along with Chromatic and Andy Lester and a bunch of other people, into writing tests. You submit a patch, you write a test. You submit a patch, you write a test. You report a bug, needs a test. New feature, needs a test. So yeah, basically there was a problem. Nobody was solving that problem. I made it a simpler solution, and then I'll say advertised it,
Oh,
but you know, yelled about it a lot on P5P and in talks and things.
yeah.
So
So people need to, yeah, you need to talk about stuff that you do. It's not
yeah,
enough that just to
but
make some awesome thing and then
but you
everyone
also got
will
to you
use.
also got to give it a simple interface, give it good documentation, give it a tutorial, make people see the value in it for them. Basically, make them see the subjective value in it. as opposed to telling people, oh yeah, testing is great for the project.
Wait. How did you do that? Okay, let's stop there. The subjective value of that. What
The
is that?
subject. Oh, okay. So subjective value, basically objective value, as in like it is valuable for everybody. It is valuable for the project. It is a good thing to write tests. A lot of times, best practices are kind of we have good style because it is good. Subjective value is where you say you do this because it is good for you,
Yeah. Okay,
and
but
is good for you in the short term, in the medium term, and the long term. So how did I do that?
yeah.
Um,
What subjective values did I mean? Yeah. I think how did you do that? Maybe that's the question.
well, first thing was a lot of people were saying, why do we need a testing library? I can just write print. I can just print OK with an if statement. That's really easy. And
Wait a
so I
second.
said,
Just one step back. So
yeah.
the test simple is printing OK one, OK two, whatever. Was
hmm
there the harness was already there? So what was
Harness,
the
yeah. Test harness and tap were there in Perl 1.
okay?
Tap was there in its basic form. There was a thing called test, all caps, that was basically test harness, and test harness evolved directly out of that. It was all already there. There were already tests.
Okay,
Um,
so you fit to that interface already.
oh yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
good.
Um, so yeah, getting people would say like, I can just print this stuff out. Why do I need a library to do this sort of thing? And what I encountered in that was people would seem to like, as soon as they started writing a test, there's like half their brain would fall out, because they would forget that they're writing a program, and suddenly they'd forget about structure and subroutines and loops and reuse, and they'd go back to like, I'm writing a little script, so I can just write the same 3 lines over and over and over again. So the subjective value is there is simply you call a subroutine, and then you know exactly what you're doing, and it has these. So just right there, it's a basic appeal to this is how you program. We don't even need to argue about this. Um, and then you add in things like, okay, there are diagnostics. If you want to compare, does A equal B, and then you just say, okay, A equals B, and then it says, well, they're not, but you don't know why. So the next step after that was the diagnostics. Was it introducing is and like to say they're not. A is not equal to B, and here is what A is, and here's what B is. Very simple, but just sped up their testing time so that when the test failed, it would immediately know what went wrong, so they could debug it and fix it. They didn't have to go in, add print statements, use a debugger, or whatever else.
So it's interesting because when you said objective and subjective, I was thinking about these like objective would be that it's good for your business or for your company or whatever, and the subjective would be that you can sleep better at night because you know that your code won't break.
That's a subjective reason as well. Yeah, the
So
pager isn't going to go off. Haha, pager. I actually met somebody with a pager who is not a doctor or a drug dealer or over the age of 40.
okay.
Um, yeah, so your pager won't go off in the middle of the night. Exactly. And so you can also say things like, look, if your code is well tested, you can be bold. You can now start tearing out the internals and rewriting it and making it faster and using better algorithms, because you know that when you push the button, it's going to say okay, or it's not, and it's going to tell you that you broke something. And you don't need to remember all these little details about, 6 years ago, we had a bug on VOS that, so we have this special code in here for that reason. You don't need to remember any of that. You don't need to try and keep all that in your head. Test remember it for you.
So the question would be then, okay, so now if I have a huge application already in production, I mean, we are making tons of money. That's what I hear
hmm
from clients. And then why should we start testing now? Why is it good for us? It's a lot of money to put in there.
If you're not changing it, don't. Leave it. If this is something that just cranks away in the corner and nobody ever has to touch it, fine, leave it. But if this is something that cranks away in the corner and you're not touching it because you need to touch it and you're afraid to because, of course, you lose half your business, this is your credit card processing or your warehousing or something like that, then your entire business is being held back by the fact that you cannot touch this code. The center of your business is rotten, and you know it. It would be kind of like, if you had A milling, if you produce parts and your milling machine is 50 years old and it's going to fall apart, and you've got like one guy who knows how to maintain it, and that person is ready for retirement. It's sort of like you're just living on
You are
borrowed.
putting on the edge case here.
Well, but that's hyperbole is always the best way to describe things.
Yeah. So yeah, but the counter argument always yeah, but we have a QA department. So
Oh, well, so people clicking buttons on things. Yeah. So I worked with a place that did a lot of manual testing, and the most terrifying thing that the testers would get was a change that said no user visible change, because it meant that the programmers had redesigned something, um, but possibly something really central to everything. And now, in order to confirm that it worked, they had to confirm that every piece of functionality still works the same way it did, and the testers simply could not do that. They didn't have the time, they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't know what all the functionality was. So it just it wastes colossal loads of expensive human time, and it also means that you don't actually know if everything works anymore. Um, and so basically, the trade-off between manual testing and automated testing, and it's not necessarily a straight trade-off. The trade-off there is one, manual testing is cheap in the short term, and but not very effective either in the long term. And automated testing is expensive in the short term, especially when you are building on nothing. Very expensive in the short term, and it takes some time to reach fruition. Although there are ways to mitigate that. Um, but it's very, very cheap in the long term because your programmers just have to, push a button. Still works, still works, still
yeah,
works, still works.
question, the question, what is long term and short term? I mean, I can tell you that when I write a program, for me, long term is usually like 10, 20 minutes. That would be long term.
Well, yeah, when I
But
talk to companies and they ask me what is the long term, I'm usually talking to a company that's already been in business for 5 years, 10 years, and my answer is you're already in the long term. You're already burning money on this. Every day you spend without a good test suite is
yeah.
just you're continuing to burn into the long term.
Okay, so I understand that you're an advocate for testing, automated testing. I could guess that.
Yeah,
But so what would you suggest a company are you going somewhere? No.
I need to go find. I'm going to seek power.
Okay. Okay. So we'll see if the interview
Yeah,
can go on like this.
Portland man's power is drained by the sun.
Okay.
But let's just continue. We'll take a little tour.
Okay, good.
Uh,
You
what
show around us the place. Yeah, that's nice.
what would I
So
what would I say to what?
so if now you have a client, or I don't know, do you do contract works, by the way? So
Yes,
okay,
yes, I do.
so how do you do this? People are coming to you, or you're advertising somewhere.
Oh, I'm a terrible businessman. Usually, there's somebody, usually a programmer or a technical manager, who knows me or knows of me, and they contact me either directly or they go to their boss and they say, "Hey, we need to do this thing. We need to do testing. We should contact Shorn about this." So, my code is my resume.
Okay, that's good. That's actually something that I keep telling to people when they ask, okay, why should I do, let's say, open source? And then one of the things I'm telling them that, okay, that could be a great power. So yeah, so I'm telling them that if they write open source code, that probably will help them also finding job.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's how I got
um,
my first big job. Was I wrote a CPAN module called it was Text Metaphone, which was a little XS module that I almost literally copied out of a book, and that and having contacts through Carnegie Mellon University got me my first dot-com boom job, my first real job, in New York City, making more money than I had ever thought I could make as a college failure.
college failures, I think they do very well. I mean, some of them at least. I don't know.
Yeah, some of them. I think there's a certain amount of selection bias going on here.
So Okay, so let's say there's this client who invites you, and well, assuming that they already know that they want something automated, what do you suggest to them to do, or how do you get started there? Or
It's interesting because I'm writing a new class on this subject right now. I'm going to go do some training for a client next week, and I started by well, okay. So are you asking in sense of like what do we do as an organization, or what do we do as a programmer, or I mean, what you do is you get help. Sorry.
yeah, so they have this application, right? That's making lots of money for them.
Yep.
It's not tested at all.
hmm
Where do you start? You start writing unit tests. It's a big like a
You
spaghetti,
start,
like
yeah. Well,
so.
you start. The problem is testing is one of those multifaceted things. Like you don't just sit down and go, we're going to write some tests because it's usually not really a technological problem, just a technological problem at that point. Usually the code is poorly designed, really tightly coupled together. You oftentimes have things like the classics are, you're not using an ORM, so you just have SQL statements stuck all over the code. Nobody really knows what the schema is. You might have big giant subroutines that do too much work and they print directly or they write directly to files that aren't so they're hard to get at. Things aren't configurable. You might not be able to configure where the database goes to, what files they write to. Um, so you wind up basically having to simultaneously redesign both your code itself, while you're writing tests. You need to, oftentimes it's undocumented. Oftentimes they are using version control poorly. You're not using feature branches. They're committing way too large
Do
chunks.
they use version control?
To these days, I have not found a client that is not using version control in a long time.
Mm.
It used to be that I would walk in and they like version what? Um,
Okay.
um, but these days I can fairly reliably go in and they've got everything in some sort of version control. Um, you are, let's see, I said version control, not using feature branches. Oftentimes their release cycle is too long. Very often they're very siloed. One person knows about one
Okay.
portion of the code and there's no cross-sharing going on. Um, so that's what I mean by you kind of walk into these things and you have to look at the entire mess because if you just try and attack the code for testing, you can't test it. It's one of the examples in my class is I have this little CGI program, simple CGI program it's just a straight script. It calls the CGI object. It prints out a header. It calculates the time, and it just prints out an HTML page with the time in it. And the whole demonstration of that is like, how do we go from this thing, which is just blot, I'm going to print out an HTML page, and your goal is to test that the time function is correct, and then add all these features to it. And the demonstration part is like, look, you can't test it like this. You have to get it into a better state. You have to make a call as a library. You have to extract the date logic from the HTML code and put it into its own subroutine. You've got to make it so that the date calculation logic is separated from the date formatting logic because it's a pain in the butt to try and have to like parse out the date format every time to make sure it's printed out a valid date. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Clients will contact me, wanting to have test suites done in terms of months, and I have to tell them like we can start, but it's going to be years until you have something. So to mitigate that, what you can do is you can pick a subsystem and test the hell out of it, so that they see some demonstration of the value. What you don't want to do is be scattershot all over the place, because if you do
Okay.
that, then you put in all this work and you can't,
You,
and you see no benefit from it
yeah.
because your coverage is terrible.
Michael, I have tons of more questions about testing. So
Uh-huh.
I hope that we'll have another time, but we're
Sure.
starting to run out of time. And I still wanted to ask you about the Git training that you're going to do at YAPC,
Oh,
right?
sure.
So
Yeah.
it's like, what's the title? It's Git for people for 4 years and up?
Git
Or
for ages 4 and up.
ages?
Yes.
Why the age
Yeah.
limit?
Oh, why the age limit? Choke. This is a choking hazard. Very dangerous.
Okay.
It's because it uses Tinker Toys, children's toys,
Oh,
little
okay.
sticks and wheels that stick together,
I see.
and it's just lifted off the can.
Who should attend this training?
You should hand this very reasonably priced training. For
Okay, well, I know. Okay,
100.
don't start with the price. Okay, I understand that you're not a businessman. Right.
No,
Don't start.
I'm,
Start
I'm,
with the
I'm
value,
just, I'm just
that
plugging.
people get out of it.
It's an amazing value. The value is so what it is it gives Git is very, very hard to understand as a version control system. If you read the docs, if you look at the interface, if you look at the command names, they don't make any sense. There's so many switches and there's so many commands, there's so many different ways to do it. So the value of it is you've been using Git for a little bit, or you've been using some other version control system and you switch to Git and you're going, oh my God, what is this thing? Everything seems rote, like how do I do X? Well, I type this command, this command, this command, but I have no understanding of what actually happened. If I get into trouble, I don't know how to get out of it. The kind of person who will delete their Git repository and then reclone it rather than try and figure out why a merge went wrong, which I did for probably my first 2 years of using Git. That sort of person, when should come to this talk, and what you get out of it is an understanding of what's going on behind the scenes when you issue the commands. And Git is really more about manipulating Git than it is about version control. It's more about manipulating the underlying data structures. And when you know that when I say, git add or git commit, this happens in the repository and I can understand it visually, now you know here's the state that I'm in, here's the state that I want to be at, and here are the steps, the transitions that I want to go through to get to that state, and these are the commands that perform those transitions. So you start redefining commands instead of saying, git add adds a file to the repository, you redefine, or git commit, you redefine them in terms of how they alter the underlying data structure. And that's a really terrible way to design a system, but that's the way Git is designed. And it makes so much more sense when you look at it that way.
So, who is this training for? Is it for? So, do you assume that people already know some Git and struggle, and now they will understand, or also people who don't know Git at all yet, and this is the first encounter?
It's more for the former. It's more for people who have used Git a little bit and are really struggling with it, or even use Git for a long time and still don't really feel comfortable with it. I keep trying to push back the necessary level of expertise in Git, but I'm not there to be able to advertise it as hey, here's your first approach to version control. I would like it to be from zero, but it isn't. I've reduced Git down to about 12 commands to try and get some of the complexity reined in, and I've tried to add in more explanation about the Git workflow, what the commands do, and remove a lot of the necessary requirements. But this still is an expectation that you have used version control before, you understand the basic version control concepts, and you've at least encountered Git before, and done an init and add and commit, and git init, add, commit, diff, log, branch merge, push pull.
Yeah, the basic things, or not that basic, but yeah, some of this. Okay, great. It's all this information I'll put, or at least the links I'll put below the video, so people watching it will be able to find it easily.
Call now.
Yeah, cool. Now, yeah, click here. Yeah, and I really thank you for this interview. It was really great, and
Yeah,
I
thanks a lot.
hope that we'll be able to continue at another time. Okay.
Yeah.
So this was the Perl Maven show with Michael Schwern, and thank you for watching it. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Goodbye, Internet.